So welcome back to our channel, and today we're gonna talk about belting. Okay, was that cheesy enough?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna talk about belting high notes with complete vocal technique. And the first thing to say is that belting is actually not a term used in complete vocal technique. So we're going to talk about how to approach sounds that people often call belting from the perspective of complete vocal technique. First of all, we'll of course need to look at what belting is. And, if you search online, you'll find a billion different variations and a billion different sounds that people call belting. First thing to mention, although I said that belting is not currently a CVT term, it actually used to be. So in the first edition of the book, edge mode was actually called belting. And that gives us a bit of a clue what we're going to talk about today.
The problem when you have a term like belting and there's maybe not enough scientific information about what that term is, what that term means in a physiological sense, then you will get a lot of interpretations of what this could be. My first experience with when I first learned to sing, belting were the money notes, if you like, the notes that make people like that when you perform them. And coming from a classical background, it was then something like, hey! And that was the ideal. It was essentially a note that was loud, powerful, and impressive. It's a fairly simplified description of belting because it can sound quite different to that.
Yeah. And I'd add actually that the scientific definition of belting is actually, rather clear, at least to a degree. It's just that, a lot of people don't know what it is.
But there's also been a lot of research done over the last 20 years. So
Yeah. The definition that I see quoted the most in science papers comes from Schutte and Miller. And it says, belting is a manner of loud singing that is characterized by consistent use of chest register in a range in which larynx elevation is necessary to match the first formant with the second harmonic on open vowels. I know a lot of technical terms in there. Let's just notice a couple things there. So it says consistent use of chest register in a range in which larynx elevation is necessary. So raising the larynx, which is also an interesting point we're going to discuss later. To match the first formant with the second harmonic on open vowels, I won't go into too much detail about that. But basically, formants are vocal tract resonances. So the way we set up our vocal tracts. And the second harmonic is basically, harmonics are overtones that are always present when we make a note. And second harmonic is basically one octave above the pitch you're singing. So what that means is that when belting, you will see a strong octave overtone. There's a paper from Tietze and others called Source Vocal Tract Interaction in Female Operatic Singing and Theater Belting. And for belting, he mentions some physiological features: a wide open mouth with a raised larynx and a narrow pharynx maintains a high first formant so that both the fundamental and the second harmonic can possibly be reinforced, blah, blah, blah. A Wikipedia entry on belting, which we can also link below for anyone interested, and it says that belting features minimal airflow than in any other type of phonation. Maximum muscular engagement of the torso. We'll talk a bit about that when we talk about support. Then high positioning of the larynx. So we're seeing, some similarities between all these definitions, and narrowing of the aryepiglottic sphincter, also known as the twanger. And then just the last thing, we have the Estill recipe. Basically, they have a recipe for belting, like all the different things you need to do for belting, and we won't go into all of the points, but I will just mention that they're also mentioning that you need what they call thick vocal folds. You need a narrow aryepiglottic sphincter, which we in CVT usually call epiglottic funnel, a high larynx, torso anchoring, and some other stuff. High back of the tongue, that's also interesting. So we've got some ideas about how belting is defined in science. And I'd also like to add that there's actually a paper written by McGlashan, Thusen, and Sadolin, so CVT folks, called Overdrive and Edge as refiners of belting, because as it turns out, those two modes actually have those features that we just talked about in all of these. That's basically, we can say that that's what belting is, but maybe we can also give some sound examples as to what we think is belting or isn't belting when, talking about these definitions.
Yeah,
So
sure.
what qualifies as belting?
And this is the big question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're going to stick with CVT, then belting would usually be overdrive or edge. Full metallic sound. Hey! The overdrive example. Overdrive being based around two vowel forms. Oh! Hey! And over a certain volume, I guess you could say, we would classify this as a full metallic sound. You could categorize it as belting. And the interesting thing in CVT is originally belting just used to be edge, or in the position of where edge is now.
Well, actually was edge. So at one point it was renamed into edge.
Yeah.
To avoid confusion.
Makes sense. To give an edge example. Yeah, I mentioned the overdrive vowels for overdrive. A, O, as an overdrive example. In edge. And maybe it doesn't sound belted enough. Just to give a more dramatic belting example. So critical with the full metallic modes is that you support in the correct way, because with a certain amount of vocal fold closure is going to mean that you need a lot less airflow to produce the tone than you would, say, for example, with neutral.
So I would say belting generally, and with this we mean overdrive and edge, features a relatively high subglottal pressure, which is pressure below the vocal folds. So we will need a lot of support energy to build up that pressure. So how do we get there? Basically, the vocal folds are going to resist the airflow because they're closed most of the time. So 70% of the time, they're going to be closed or more. We will pull in the abdomen to basically pressurize the air that is left. But we need to do that dynamically, because we can also overshoot the needed pressure and also lock up and have no place left to go to manage that pressure further on. So I would say that it's very useful to work on keeping your ribs out and gradually pulling in the abdomen to keep that pressure at the needed level. So let's say if you're singing one note, a held long note, which is high and it needs a certain amount of pressure, the less air there is left in your lungs, the more difficult it will be to maintain the same pressure. And of course, if it's the same note, same character, it makes sense that it needs the same pressure. So you will need to gradually pressurize the remaining air, because there's less and less left, to keep up the same pressure. So it needs to be done gradually in a sustained manner as you keep on producing your note. Let's maybe give some tips and exercises. You've talked about the exercise in our previous video, so if anyone didn't see that, please check it out on our channel. So give us some more ideas.
One of the things that you go through when training Overdrive and Edge, you tend to start away from the high notes, where you can make a full resonant metallic sound in a comfortable range. And this is really, really a great place to start. If you want to develop this technique, start somewhere where you can, where the tones feel reachable and comfortable for you. You can use vowels and an approach like the following. E, e, e. So if this is a range that's comfortable for you, perfect place to start. E, e, e. Get a nice centered sound, something that's easily reproducible in a consistent way. And e, e, e. I like to, at this point, take care as to what the ribs are doing, check the support, and work on changing something dynamically. Just doing a little siren, something like that, just to get yourself used to changing the pitch, and work from this point outwards, because in no time, well, what's no time? in half an hour, you could be going, hey, and already making your first belting type sounds.
Let's maybe talk about two different strategies for supporting. And one thing to do would be that I find especially helpful for this is engaging the upper back muscles. So you can either think about squeezing some oranges with your armpits, or the one I like to use is also sort of sticking your hands out like this at like a 90-degree angle and pushing your elbows to the floor. And you will notice that it actually tends to encourage your ribs going out. Doing that and pulling in the abdomen together dynamically, and you can practice that with holding a note. So just as Aaron said in the lower range, doing an okay, I'll stop. So basically, doing that gradually, pulling in the abdomen and pushing your elbows down, or squeezing some orange juice, armpit juice.
Yeah, and armpit juice. And so all of these exercises, all of these processes are a means to training your muscle memory, so that if you happen to be in the middle of a song and you need to pull up a high note suddenly, you need to have done this a few times in an exercise process during your training, to be able to just go boom and just.
And we should say, for support, the higher you go and the louder you go, the more support energy it's going to take. So, that's just something to consider. We mentioned the CVT app the last time. There are a lot more exercises and techniques that you can utilize to, practice this further. We're not going to go through all of support. So those are just some tips to get you started. The next thing we noticed in all of the definitions is the talk about larynx height. That's a bit controversial, isn't it?
Yeah, that sounds dangerous.
Yeah. a lot of singing teachers talk about not ever raising the larynx. And as we've seen pretty much Well, pretty much all the research papers on belting talk about a raised larynx position. Basically, there are obviously people who have done this belting thing for 50 years, 70 years, and so on without problems. There are those who had problems, and there are those who were singing classically and had problems as well. So, no guarantees. There doesn't really seem to be anything in raising the larynx itself that is dangerous if, done well enough. The issue is that historically there was really no tuition offered with high larynx sounds, and there was with low larynx sounds. Yeah, that's something to consider.
Add to
So,
that consideration the fact that there are instances in your everyday life where you raise your larynx and it's a completely normal function of your voice. Um, when you talk to children, for example, you then tend to take a more childlike sound. That you did a really good job. Fantastic, well done. And this is just an example of a bit of raised larynx speech, and it's a completely normal function. Why should it be dangerous while you're singing?
larynx height. So let's see. Basically, it also needs to be done dynamically. We talked about the thing, the first formant following the second harmonic, blah, blah, blah. Basically, if it says following, that means that your larynx height in belting will need to sort of follow the pitch, which also means that we've discussed this while we were talking about the concept for this video, that in some cases you will see people overshooting and raising their larynx too high too soon. So, if you're singing a note in Edge, let's say at a that pitch, if I raise my larynx way beyond that, it can get me out of Edge. There's a certain range where it needs to sit for a certain pitch. And then, you'll need it higher as you go up. So basically, I think since I've got a pretty prominent thyroid cartilage, you can probably see it with me when I say, A, A, as I go up, A, you can see it going up. So that's basically what you need to train. So how do we raise the larynx? Let's throw out some tips on how to do that.
I thought your example was a great example of seeing that motion in progress. Just laying your fingers just here on your throat if it's not uncomfortable for you to do. Some people don't like it at all, but just doing that and just doing quiet sirens like this are enough to feel how your larynx, the higher you go, wants to move upwards. And it's essentially a case of allowing that movement to happen as well. And orientation is always good to have if you want to allow a certain sound to happen. So my go-to for the raised larynx is the childlike sound. Yep. So if I was going to go, you can hear the sound getting lighter and more childlike the higher I go. Now, this is just a starting point that you can work from. And with progress, you can turn it into something louder.
Yeah. And I think it's actually a good idea to, with that kind of exercise, to maybe already start from sort of an overdrivey or edgy sound, because you could kind of keep the larynx lower and transition into something else like a but that's obviously quite far from belting.
Yes. This is true.
Some more tips. You mentioned imitating a child. So, making your voice younger is a nice way of thinking of raising the larynx. You also said allow it to raise, which I sometimes say we need a comfortably raised larynx, because sometimes you can see people, overemphasizing the raised larynx thing, and getting to this very squeezed spot, which is not what we want either. A couple more tips. Laugh like a little girl. And we can also counter that example with like laugh like Santa Claus. So if we have that's gonna be high, or ho ho ho, that's gonna be low. We can pant like a small dog or pant like a big dog. So or is going to be examples of high larynx or low larynx. If I want to lower the larynx, I can maybe yawn. Something that goes often well with raising the larynx is kind of pulling your tongue out. That will tend to raise the larynx. Anything to add there, or should we go for twang?
The examples I try and give when I'm talking about raising and lowering the larynx, I also try and avoid things like twanging. So
Okay.
The example you gave of the very squeezed sound was extremely twanged as well. So if I give an example, then the childlike sound, that's really, really good. I'm deliberately not twanging it as well.
So that's a fair point for separating the two. We will kind of need both.
For belting,
maybe
definitely.
less for overdrive. So we can talk about the differences between edge and overdrive in a bit.
Yeah, sure.
So twang. Many of the definitions we mentioned were talking about narrow pharynx. We're talking about what was the narrowing of the area epiglottic sphincter, the twanger, and so on. So that's basically what we in CVT call epiglottic funnel. That's this funnel shape formed between the bottom of the epiglottis. So epiglottis is basically cartilage that keeps your food and drinks from coming down into your lungs, which is quite neat feature to have, to not choke when you eat or drink. So basically it tilts all the way back, and it's like a lid. It covers your vocal folds and your windpipe, and nothing goes in there and you don't choke. But in this particular motion, we will have mostly the bottom part of the epiglottis here, the vocal folds here, arytenoids here, moving closer to the arytenoids, and the arytenoids moving closer to the epiglottis. And there are also these area epiglottic folds between the two, which kind of make that funnel shape narrower front to back. And that's helpful for a variety of reasons. And Ingo Tita wrote about that quite a lot. He calls it epilaryngeal narrowing. It drastically improves the efficiency of phonation. But let's get into the practical part of that. How do we twang? What do we do? How do we get there? We talked a bit about that with the duck exercise in our previous video. So again, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. But could you give us some more ideas for twanging?
Yeah, sure. There are accents in the world that produce naturally a very twanged sound. If you come from certain parts of the USA, you would notice quite a present, penetrating quality in the voice. There are certain characters that speak with a like an evil genius, for example. Yeah, all different examples of how you can find this this duck-like twanged sound.
Yep.
Obviously, you could also look to the mode edge, where a twanged sound is essential, and the vowels that you would use to orientate the mode edge will also tendentially produce a more twang-to-like sound in your voice. Even the word twang itself produces a twanged sound when you choose to twang the word a little bit. Twang, 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 twang. It almost happens all on its own.
So just a couple more ideas for getting there. Imitating a child crying, like a wah, or a diving airplane. Ah!
That sounded
okay.
just like an aeroplane.
Yeah.
Ivan, wow.
Then we can have. You mentioned the evil genius having an evil plan. What else? Basically making your voice very laser-like and cutting. Making basically a very small space between the back of your tongue and your soft palate, kind of like you're holding a peanut there. Eh, 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 eh. Basically, keeping those two very close together, which will also go together better with some vowels than the others, and we'll get to that in a bit. So we already talked about Overdrive and Edge. You also mentioned the vowels for Overdrive and Edge, for Overdrive actually. So maybe we should also do the same for Edge, because we also have several vowels there to choose from.
Yes. Be my guest.
Yeah. Okay. So for Overdrive, Aaron already greatly demonstrated O and E vowels. So the O, A. For Edge, we've got E. So the same vowel, just a lot more twanged. E, and A. If we give each of those vowels a word that we can get them from, if we have O, we can think so. So the first part of the diphthong, not the U part. So. Then we have stay for E. Of course, again, the first part of the diphthong. Then for the A, we can think cat or hat. Then for E, we can say sit. So not sit, sit, which is something I have to often, because like in Croatian and other Slavic languages, we don't have this I. We only have the E, and then people have trouble finding it, and often you will even hear people saying sit instead of sit. So did I forget any? And that's the one I find tricky based on the word that is written, because the word written is herb. But I guess I usually say that, and you can correct me since you're British, that the intended pronunciation is probably a bit more British, which is kind of like heb.
I think that's pretty accurate, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. There's always a little bit of discussion around vowels. Whenever you get a lot of people from a different nationality, different backgrounds, coming together with different accents and different mother tongues, to say, okay, Overdrive needs to be A and O. Then a German might, for example, say O and O. Okay, O.
Yep.
And instantly you have a O, which is just usually not going to get loud.
Yep.
So
absolutely,
you really have to go for the go, the part of the vowel and not the oh part.
And there is a little bit of a leeway in the vowels. So, as long as you can get a loud projected sound out of them and they feel good, that's fine. That's the thing I've noticed, between different CVT teachers, we will have like slight differences in the way we pronounce different vowels. And that's fine as long as we can still, make the sound that is needed, to get that thing working up in the higher range. There is another quite important difference between Overdrive and Edge, and that's pitch. Overdrive is defined as going up to a C5 for males and D5 for females. I should say, when we talk about octave numbers, we're using scientific pitch notation, which people from my country or maybe even Germany, I'm not sure, might be confused with, because they often call them C2 and D2. So that's a different system. Basically, scientific pitch notation calls the lowest C on the piano is C1. So this would be C5. It's basically this note here. Or if I sing it, it's going to be hey! That's a C5. So if I'm going to go overdrive, that's going to be pretty much the highest it's going to go. So if I go with that O vowel, oh, 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 that's kind of the top for that. But if I use the edge vowels and add a bit more twang in there, it can go higher. Let's say hey, hey. That's why the distinction matters. We could also give like on the same pitch, on the same vowel, since both have the e vowel in them. We could give some examples of overdrive versus edge. Let's say around here. So overdrive, a, edge, a.
All right. Oh, oh, ow, ow.
Cool. So yeah, edge has more of that eh in it, while the overdrive one is more oh. How do we get, like, when somebody wants to find their edge or overdrive, what do we do?
Center to begin with.
Yep.
Always taking care to control to keep an eye on your support. And I like to do transitions. Just change the vowel on one set tone. So to take the example you just gave, oh, to give a transition there and back.
In overdrive, usually the first thing we would go for is this bite thing. So basically smiling and then dropping your jaw. And it's especially useful for high notes. And that's something that you will see belters do. Like when they sing their high notes, it's usually going to be like, So kind of like if you were to bite into an apple. So, doing that. And then if we're talking about overdrive, like you're shouting to someone across the street and you say, hey, oh, or you're at a football match and you're saying, whoa. For edge, we have this distinct twang thing happening. So we need more twang than an overdrive. So we would also keep that bite thing going and, keep that back of the tongue high up on the molars, on the back teeth. A. And basically getting all of the vowels into that sort of pocket. So a. Maybe we should do some phrases with each, some belting phrases to end it.
Yeah, sure.
Here's one phrase from my band's song, Don't Turn Away, which you can find. So, Side Effects, Don't Turn Away. I can also link it in the description.
Nice plug.
Yep. Don't turn away, keep angst at bay!
So I'm going to do an example from a band that no one will have ever heard of called Queen.
Obscure band.
Yeah, just really obscure band. You should check them out, though. They're not bad. Not bad at all. Empty spaces, what are we living for? So that's a rather overdrivey example of The Show Must Go On. Elton John sang this song a few notes deeper than the original and sung it pretty damn overdrive. So
like he does.
He's a very like he does. He's a very good example of an overdrive. For overdrive. Empty spaces, what are we living for? Would be a more edge-like approach.
And that would help you bring it higher in pitch.
Exactly. To give an example, because you mentioned a higher part. The show must go on would be close to the overdrive limit in as a B4, the overdrive limit being C5, and show must go on is the edge example.
If anyone wants to learn more about it or wants to practice with us, you're free to book a lesson with either of us, and you can find our contact details in the description below.
As you said, if you've enjoyed the video, share us with your friends and family on all the social media networks. Like, subscribe, leave us a comment, and you can contact either of us if you are in need of vocal coaching.
And also, when we're talking about comments, you can also tell us what you'd like to hear from us in the future.
That would be really good to know.
Yeah. See ya. Bye.